Hello, my name is Jacob Monk. Welcome to a little video about Elsinore. What is Elsinore? Well, it is a town in Denmark. Denmark, this little country, 5.5 million people living in the northern Europe. Denmark is an old country. We have a line of kings going 1,000 years back. And now I will tell you about a little town called Elsinore. In Danish it is expressed Helsinore. Elsinore in English. In Elsinore there are living around 25,000 people. And in the old days, that is 600 years ago, people talked about that Elsinore should maybe be the main city, the capital of Denmark. But that wasn't decided. So today we still have Copenhagen as our capital. And there is around 25 kilometers from Copenhagen to Elsinore. So if you visit Denmark, it will be very easy for you to come to Elsinore. You can go by train. It will take you half an hour. Here you see the most interesting attraction in Helsinore. This is Kronborg, Crown Castle, it can be expressed in English. Kronborg. Kronborg, it's an old Renaissance castle. Before it was a simple fortress, and it was placed at the entrance to Øresund. Øresund, it is the belt leading between Denmark and Sweden down to the sea, covering North Germany, Poland, Estland, Letland, Litauen, Russia, Finland, and a lot of coastal towns of Sweden. In the old days, this area, it was a very central area, because the king we had, he got the idea that we could make taxation. This king was called Erik af Pommern. He lived from 1382 until 1459. He had the idea that to earn money, we should put tax to the ships passing by Øresund. And therefore he placed this castle with some nasty guns. There were two parts of the castle. One part was in Denmark, the other part was in what is today called Sweden. But you have to understand that the times we're talking about in the Middle Ages, this part of Sweden, Skåne, it belonged to Denmark. So Erik af Pommern, he decided to place a fortress, two places, on the Swedish side and on the Danish side. And both sides, they had these cannons, so if any ship wanted to pass through without paying the tax, they would be gunned down. And if they succeeded passing by, well, then he had some fast-going small pirate ships, and they would follow after them and rob them before one day was gone. So in practice, it was impossible to pass through Øresund without paying tax. And this taxation was a big source of income for the Danish society from 1429 up until 1857. After 1857, the taxation system in Øresund, Øresund's taxation, it was abandoned because USA, they protested a lot about having to pay tax for sailing in international waters. And therefore there was made an agreement between, on one side, Danish government, on the other side, the governments of the users of Øresund. And that was England, France, Holland, Belgium, Spain, USA, and a few other states. together they paid a huge amount of money to Denmark. It equals to 10 years of Øresunds taxation. They paid that to Denmark, and after that, the taxation was abolished forever. So we don't have any Øresund taxation today. But now I want to tell you a little about the story coming before we had the Øresund taxation. Well, I will show you here Erik af Pommern. This was the king, I told you, from 1382 until 1459 he lived. And he was the son, not the biological son, but he was imported from Germany. So he was called the son of our very famous queen, Margrethe I. Today you can find the grave of Margrethe I if you visit Roskilde, around 25 kilometers from Copenhagen. It's a short tour, taking 20 minutes by train. You can go to Roskilde and visit the big church there, Roskilde Domkirke. There you can see the grave of Margrethe I. And Margrethe I, she was a daughter of Valdemar Atterdag, the king who actually made Denmark one single state, because before the father of Margrethe I, he made Denmark one single state. Well, Denmark was kind of owned by German nobilities. These German nobilities, they had bought parts of Denmark, and actually it was only 25% of what is called Denmark today that was considered real Danish territory, controlled by Valdemar Atterdag. But Valdemar Atterdag, he had some people that could help him. One was called Niels Ebbesen, and actually he went and killed one of the German nobilities. And then the rest, they choose to sell their ground in Denmark, and after some years Denmark was liberated. It was collected as one big state controlled by Valdemar Atterdag, and that is the father of Margrethe I. Margrethe I, she also made what is called the Kalmar Union, the union between Denmark, Norway and Sweden. And this union was a very big thing, but it also had an end, and it had an end after the bloodbath in Stockholm. A later king called Christian II, he killed 82 nobilities and bishops in Stockholm, and after that we had a long series of wars with Sweden. So this was the end of the union between Denmark, Sweden and Norway. And since then we have been 3 independent countries. Now we are moving on in our visit here in Elsinore, and I can show you a map showing the different places we are going to visit in this town. You can see here, this is the station when we come by train. If you come by train, this is the station. After that, we going to a cathedral, the main cathedral of Elsinore. It's called St. Olav Church. From there, we're going to the living place of Sophie Brahe, Tycho Brahe's sister. From there to the monastery of the Carmelites and the church of the monastery. And before we visit any of these places, we go to the memory monument of Erik af Pommern. And maybe we have the time to see Kronborg. You can't see Kronborg here on the map. It is out here. But this is what we are going to see during our small visit to Elsinore. And first of all, we are going to see the church of St. Olav. But before we come to this church, I'll show you the monument of Erik af Pommern in the center of Elsinore. This monument is standing, and you can read on the monument, it's written in Danish, "I hope for the sea. The sea is my hope." This was the motto of Erik af Pommern, who made the first castle that was placed on the corner of the coastline before Kronborg was made. Kronborg was actually made several hundred years later. It was a Renaissance castle made to impress foreign emperors, kings, and visitors coming to Denmark. In the beginning, this was only a plain fortress with a lot of guns, being able to control Øresund, because that was the idea. But now we are coming to the first church, and but before we come to the church, we pass through a street here called Sankt Anna Gade. You know Sankt Anna, it was the mother of Virgin Mary. And Elsinore is around 1,000 years old, so it's an old Catholic city. And therefore the churches and the streets, they are named after Catholic saints. Sankt Anna was the mother of Virgin Mary, probably you know so. And there was a monastery called after Sankt Anna, and some churches too. But the church we are going to start up visiting is not named after Sankt Anna. It is named after another saint called St. Olav. Well, St. Olav, he was a saint that was elected by the Pope in year 1031. He was a warrior, and here you can see one of his wars. It was against some heathen Vikings. It was called the Battle of Stiklestad. And unfortunately, St. Olav, he was killed in this battle. Here you have another painting from, of course, made many years later. It is the Battle of Silkestad, and that is where St. Olav was killed. And because Norway was a part of Denmark these days, and we are talking around the 11th century, therefore St. Olav was a Danish saint too. He was a Danish saint because Norway was a part of Denmark. So a lot of churches also in Denmark is named after St. Olav. And still today in the Faroe Islands and in Norway, the day where he was killed, where he died, is a big festival day in Norway, even today. Well, this church, I'll find a picture of the church. It will take me a short time. Here you have it. It is St. Olav Church. It is around a walk 10 minutes from the station. Not more than maybe 1 kilometer or so. You'll easily find this church, an old middle-aged church. It was the main church in the city. Of course, it has been changed quite a lot since the Reformation in 1536. But it's still the same old church. You see it also here. And outside the church, you see there are places for graves. In the old days, when you were a rich man, like here, it's an old French ambassador being buried here. And you can see outside this grave there is saying, it says something like Anciciorens non rus. This is a mixture of French and Latin. It means we are all going to die. And for sure this is true. You see the bones picturing death. And he has a ring of leaves around his head, picturing the honor he has earned through his life. And this man, and maybe also his family, they are lying down in this mini cellar. If you were very rich, you had the money to had a grave inside the church. You had to pay a lot of money to be buried inside the church. A little more, less expensive was it to be buried outside the church. I'll show you some graves from outside the church. You see them here. They are small, here and here and here and here. They are holes, rooms where pretty wealthy people were buried. And if you were not wealthy at all, you could be buried out here. It was the cemetery for normal people. But if you were very well off, you would be buried inside the church. And therefore, there is an old saying here in Denmark, you can be stinking rich. That means we can smell that you are rich. And it comes from the Middle Age, this expression. It means that inside the church there was always an awful smell because of all the dead people being buried inside the church. You know, when you are being buried, they were not cremated at these times. They were only buried in a coffin and put under the floor. Then you smell, maybe for 6 months, there will come smell up through the floor and go into the church. And therefore they had to use a lot of religious smoke, so-called holy smoke, during the masses to take away the bad smell of the dead people. But from that we have the expression to be stinking rich, at være stinkende rig, to be so rich that you smell. That means so rich that you can be buried inside the church. Well, we are continuing our tour here, and now we come to an old hospital. Here at the corner up here, you see an old statue of Virgin Mary. And this hospital here, just a moment, I'll find my notes. It is called the White Brothers Hospital. After the Reformation, all these hospitals run by religious orders, they were taken down. It was quite a problem for people being sick to go to the hospital. Actually, this was not possible because there was no public health care. And the old religious health care being driven by the Catholic monks and nuns, it was abolished, taken down. So you just have to take care of yourself. And we can see right after the Reformation, the living age in Denmark, it was falling drastically because you had no possibility of being cured if you had a serious disease. But then, years later, the king introduced some kind of public health care. Well, let's continue down to the monastery and the monastery church lying just beside the hospital. Here you have to the left the old Carmelite monastery, and to the right you have the Saint Maria Church. Saint Maria Church was abolished after the Reformation, 1536, and it was used as a stable for horses and cows for 300 years. After that, the government of Elsinore thought, well, maybe we can use this building for tourists or for visitors or something. And then the horses and cows were taken out of the building and it was renovated. So today it's a quite nice church, but it's a Protestant church. You have to understand that, because after the Reformation, the Catholic faith was illegal in Denmark. That happened up until 1848. But now let us go inside the monastery and see what it is about. Here you see the garden where they had vegetables and fruits and plants to cover their own needs. A monastery like this, it had maybe around 20 or 30 monks living there. They were only men. And the idea of the Carmelite order was that you're living separated from the world. You're living by yourself. You're not living in contact with the world. You are preparing your own death. You are preparing your entrance to heaven. Therefore you live isolated from the world. But some of the monks there, they were very learned. They had learned and read a lot. One of them was called Paul Helgesen, and actually he was a professor at the university in Copenhagen. So he traveled from Elsinore and to Copenhagen one way and the other. It took 1 day to travel from Elsinore to Copenhagen in the 14th century. Yeah, but he had to go to Copenhagen because he was a professor at the university. So therefore there was some kind of small monastery in the center of Copenhagen. You can still see this monastery in St. Peter's Street, in the center of Copenhagen, close to Nørreport station. The monastery has been taken down, but you can still see the walls of the monastery. And the main monastery where Paul Helgesen and other Carmelite monks were living, it was here. There were 2 floors on the monastery. On first floor the monks were living, and on the ground floor there were kitchen, meeting rooms, and entrance to the church, and a lot of practical rooms for practical affairs. And if you're interested in Danish history, you'll know that our king, the last Catholic king we had, called Christian III, he had a small girl coming up from Norway. She was his lover. Well, actually he had a real queen coming from Europe, but he didn't care much about her. He only cared about his girlfriend, and this girlfriend, she was very unpopular among the nobility in Denmark. She was so unpopular because nobility in Denmark were afraid that that this would put Denmark in a bad light, and maybe it would even lead to the church in Denmark being excommunicated. That means that Danes couldn't go to Mass, couldn't go to Eucharist anymore. Well, therefore, one of the nobilities, he actually gave a poisoned strawberry to this young girl, the girlfriend of Christian II, and he was killed. She was called Dyveke, and no one knows what happened to Dyveke, but there have been a lot of theories that she was buried, illegal buried in this monastery. It is said that her grave is under the floor here. But no one has ever investigated this rumor more in details. This is another side of the same room. So Maki Dyveke, the young lover of Christian II, she's buried here. No one really knows. But Christian II, he was a disaster. He was the one who made the bloodbath in Stockholm in 1520. This was the end of the Kalmar Union, and actually it prepared for another king, the first Protestant king we had, called Christian III. The killer of Dyveke, he was called Torben Oxe. Well, no one could prove it, but the king was convinced that Torben Oxe was the perpetrator of this murder of Dyveke, and therefore he wanted Torben Oxe to be punished. And a few months later, after the death of Dyveke, Torben Oxe was killed and buried at a cemetery called St. Gertrud's Cemetery in central Copenhagen. Well, let's continue into the church. Well, this was the church I told you about. It had been a stable for horses and cows for many years, but then the King of Denmark decided it should be renovated and taken back into a church, but not a Catholic church, a Protestant church. Therefore, everything you see in here, it is not from the Middle Ages, except for the walls, of course. And here you see in the ceiling there were paintings. These are the original paintings, but they have been renovated so they are more easy to understand. Old Catholic motifs you'll see here. And here you see a very holy picture, holy painting of Virgin Mary meeting the angel, telling her that she's going to be the mother of God. Under this painting you see two Lutheran priests, but unfortunately this picture is not that good. And here you have the place of the chair of confession. You know, in the old days, in Catholic times, people went to confession to confess their sins, and this was in the confession chair here. But it has been changed and renovated quite a lot. And here you see the shells of Santiago de Compostela. This church here was a pilgrim church. You could go on pilgrim tour from Denmark to Santiago de Compostela. And still today, when you go to Santiago de Compostela, maybe you'll find a shell like the one you see here. It is a symbol of the many Danes, maybe thousands of Danes, have been wandering from Denmark to Santiago de Compostela during the Middle Ages. You know, the national saint of Sweden, Saint Birgitta, she took this tour together with her husband. Unfortunately, her husband died in Santiago de Compostela, but she took the whole way back, and probably she brought a shell like the one you see here. Well, this is simple. This is made of wood. This is not a real shell, but it symbolizes the real shells and the pilgrim tours going to Santiago de Compostela. And here, the last picture I'll show you is inside the church, the Danish flag. You know, the Danish flag, it came from a battle we had 1219 in Lundenase, a town in Estonia. This was a part of the Danish Crusades, because the Pope had told us, you don't have to go to Jerusalem to go on crusades. It's too far away for you. You can go on crusades in the areas closer to where you are living, because there are a lot of Vikings and heathens there, and they need to be Christianized. And that is what the Danish kings did. So they traveled to Estonia and had some big battles. And during one of these battles, they found this a carpet with this sign here that is today the Danish flag. Today we know that this flag, it came from a Catholic pilgrim organization called the German Order. The German Order still exists today, 2018, but it was started around 1100. And this was, they were also fighting in what is called Estonia today. So therefore one of their warriors, maybe he was killed and he lost his dress during the battle. And this dress, it contained the Danish flag. Today when you see pictures of the German Order, you can see they have this flag, but most soldiers, they turn it around. They have a opposite version. So the cross is red and the background is white. But the Danish flag is red background and white cross. And we are very happy for the Danish flag. Well, this was everything I wanted to show you. This is also an invitation. Please come and visit us here in Denmark. You have to understand that this is an old Christian country. The government we have today, I don't think it is too much Christian, but you can study the history of Europe by studying Denmark and by studying Elsinore, just as we have done in this video. Thank you for listening.